Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was trained by the X-Men at Xavier's school. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The silence on the walk home was a living thing, a thick, suffocating presence that clung to Izuku Midoriya more tenaciously than the sludge he'd been washed clean of. It filled the space between him and his mother, a chasm of unspoken words and unasked questions. His school uniform, though scrubbed, still felt damp and smelled faintly of the sewer and ozone. The heroes had been thorough, but some things couldn't be washed away. Things like the pity in Death Arm's eyes, the weary admonishment from Kamui Woods, and the final, crushing weight of All Might's words. It's not bad to dream. But you also have to consider what's realistic. The sentence played on a loop in his head, each repetition a fresh turn of a knife already lodged deep in his chest. He had replayed that rooftop moment 1,000 times in the 30 minutes since it had happened. The burst of wind from his idol's departure had felt like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs and the hope from his soul. Inko Midoriya walked beside him, her small hand clutching his elbow with a force that bordered on painful. Her knuckles were white. She hadn't said a word since she'd arrived at the scene, her face a mask of frantic terror that had slowly hardened into a brittle, unreadable composure. She had simply taken him, thanked the heroes with a series of jerky bows, and led him away from the gawking crowds and flashing news cameras. He could feel her trembling, or perhaps it was him. It was hard to tell where one's devastation ended and the other's began. Their apartment building, usually a comforting sight, seemed to loom over them with an air of judgment. Each step up the 3 flights of stairs was a monumental effort. When they finally reached their door, Inko's hands fumbled with the keys for a long moment before the lock clicked open. Inside, the familiar scent of home did nothing to soothe him. It felt like a foreign place, a museum of a life that had belonged to a different boy, a boy who had believed. Izuku. Inko's voice was fragile, like thin glass. Go take a proper shower. A long one. I'll make you katsudon. His favorite. The meal for champions, for celebration. The bitter irony tasted like ash in his mouth. He wanted to tell her not to bother, that there was nothing to celebrate, but the words wouldn't come. He just nodded, a pathetic, jerky motion, and shuffled toward the bathroom, avoiding her gaze. He couldn't bear to see the worry in her eyes, the worry he had put there. The hot water was a small mercy, sluicing over his skin and turning the grime in the grout a darker shade of gray. He scrubbed at his arms and face until they were raw, as if he could physically exfoliate the memory of the villain's gelatinous body closing over him, the feeling of his lungs burning, the horrifying realization that this was it, this was how he died. Useless. Powerless. But even that horror paled in comparison to the rooftop. The fear of death was a primal, fleeting thing. The death of a dream was a slow, creeping rot that infected every fiber of his being. He had chased All Might, clung to his leg like a desperate child, and for his efforts, he had been granted an audience with his own executioner. The symbol of peace had calmly and rationally dismantled his entire existence. When he emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, the smell of fried pork and savory broth filled the apartment. A lie. It smelled like a lie. In his room, the first thing he saw was the wall-to-wall collage of All Might. Posters, figurines, limited edition Silver Age trading cards. A shrine to a god who had just told him he was unworthy of entering the temple. His hands moved before his brain could process the action. He reached up, his fingers touching the gleaming, confident smile on a life-size poster. With a surge of cold, quiet fury, he tore it down. The ripping sound was shockingly loud in the silent apartment. He didn't stop. One by one, the posters came down, leaving behind ugly scars of peeled paint and torn tape. He carefully took the figurines from their shelves, not throwing them, but placing them in an old cardboard box with a grim finality. He was a pallbearer at his own funeral. He changed into a plain gray t-shirt and sweats, clothes devoid of any heroic branding. When he walked into the kitchen, Inko was just placing a steaming bowl of katsudon on the table. She saw the empty box in his hands, then glanced past him towards his bedroom door, her eyes widening slightly as she saw the bare, scarred walls through the crack. Her expression crumpled for a second before she smoothed it over. Izuku, your dinner. He sat down. The pork was perfectly crisp, the egg was fluffy, the onions were sweet. It was a perfect bowl of katsudon. He picked up his chopsticks, lifted a piece of pork to his lips, and put it back down. He couldn't. It felt like swallowing glass. I'm not hungry, he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the wood grain of the table. Inko sat down opposite him, her own bowl untouched. The silence stretched, thick and painful. The doctors the heroes called, they said you were fine. Just a few scrapes, she said, her voice wavering. They said you were very brave. Brave. That's what they called it. Reckless, suicidal, idiotic. Those were the words he heard. He had done nothing. He had run in and distracted the villain for a few seconds before All Might had arrived to actually save the day. He hadn't saved Kaken. He had just added himself to the list of victims. I wasn't brave, he whispered. My legs just moved. That is brave, Izuku. No, it's not. The words erupted out of him, louder than he intended. He flinched at his own volume. It was stupid. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a quirk. I got in the way. That's all I did. That's all I can do. He finally looked at her, and the raw, unadulterated pain in his eyes made her flinch. All Might said so himself? He told me. He said I can't be a hero. Inko's heart shattered. She had spent 10 years trying to mend the wound a thoughtless doctor had inflicted with a single sentence about a joint in his pinky toe. She had propped up his dream, nurtured it, watched his All Might videos with him 1,000 times over, hoping that sheer force of will could overcome the cruel lottery of genetics. To hear that his own idol, the very source of that dream, had been the one to finally tear it all down, it was a cruelty beyond measure. She reached across the table, her hand covering his. Izuku, he pulled his hand away. Please. I'm tired. I want to go to bed. He didn't wait for an answer, just stood up and retreated to his desecrated room, closing the door softly behind him. Inko Midoriya sat alone in the kitchen, staring at 2 bowls of rapidly cooling katsudon, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to truly feel the terror of her son's situation. It wasn't just that his dream was dead. It was that his dream had almost gotten him killed. And with a sickening certainty, she knew that if it happened again, he would do the exact same thing. His heroic heart was going to be the death of him. 2 days passed in a haze of misery. Izuku went through the motions of life. He ate what was put in front of him, he answered his mother's questions in monosyllables, and he spent most of his time in his room, staring at the internet. He avoided the news reports about the sludge villain, but he obsessively scrolled through hero forums and message boards. The anonymous comments were a special kind of poison. That quirkless kid was crazy brave. Brave? He was a moron. What if All Might hadn't been there? He'd have gotten himself and the Bakugo kid killed. Seriously, there should be a law against quirkless people trying to play hero. Stay in your lane. That last one had made him close his laptop with a sharp snap. Stay in your lane. His lane was a dead end. On the 3rd day, Inko insisted they needed to get out of the apartment. They were running low on groceries, a simple, mundane excuse to force some semblance of normalcy back into their lives. Izuku agreed, mostly because he couldn't stand the oppressive silence of his room any longer. The evening air was cool and crisp, a welcome change from the stale atmosphere of their home. The walk to the market was quiet, but less tense than the walk home 2 days prior. A fragile truce had formed between them, an unspoken agreement not to talk about it. They bought milk, eggs, vegetables, and rice, the familiar routine of flimsy bandage over a gaping wound. It was on the way back, as they walked through a part of the city dense with construction sites and aging office buildings, that the world tore itself apart for the second time in less than a week. It started not with an explosion, but with a sound. A low, groaning hum, like the tortured shriek of 1,000 tons of metal being bent past its breaking point. The ground vibrated, a deep, unsettling tremor that rattled Izuku's teeth. People on the street stopped, looking around in confusion. Then it happened. The steel girders of a half-finished skyscraper a block away began to twist and writhe like angry serpents. Rebars snaked out from the concrete, impossibly long and flexible, lashing out like metallic whips. The facade of an older office building peeled away from its frame, a curtain of glass and steel crashing down onto the street below. Screams erupted, a chorus of pure panic. "Villain attack!" Someone shrieked, and the crowd surged, a frantic tide of bodies running in every direction. Inko grabbed Izuku's arm, her face pale with renewed terror. "Izuku, this way!" she cried, pulling him toward an alley. But Izuku was frozen, his eyes wide, his analysis brain kicking in despite his despair. This wasn't like the sludge villain, a singular, blob-like entity. This was chaos. The environment itself had become the enemy. He saw metal streetlights bend over, their heads smashing into the pavement. Manhole covers flew into the air like discus. The city was having a seizure. "His quirk, it's manipulating the infrastructure," Izuku muttered, his voice distant. "Incredible range. Must be some kind of large-scale ferrokinesis. Izuku, now is not the time for analysis," Inko pleaded, her pull becoming more desperate. Then he saw her. A little girl, no older than 5, standing frozen in the middle of the street. She had dropped a bright pink All Might doll, and was staring at it as a thick coil of rebars slithered toward her from a shattered sidewalk. Her mother was screaming her name from the relative safety of a storefront, trapped behind a newly formed cage of bent parking meters. Something inside Izuku snapped. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a choice. It was the same primal, idiotic, heroic instinct that had sent him running at the sludge villain. All Might's words, the forum comments, his own shattered pride, it all vanished, burned away by the sight of that terrified child. "I have to! Izuku, no!" Inko screamed, but he had already wrenched his arm from her grasp. He sprinted. His lungs burned, his legs ached, but he ran faster than he thought possible. The world narrowed to the girl, the doll, and the approaching metal tendril. He was 10 feet away, 5 feet. He scooped the girl into his arms. She was light, but her panicked sobs were a heavy weight. "It's okay. I've got you," he yelled, turning to run back. He never made it. A different piece of metal, a length of corrugated pipe ripped from the side of a building, whipped through the air. He didn't even see it coming. The impact wasn't a sharp pain. It was a dull, crushing thud against his side. It wasn't a direct hit, more of a powerful, glancing blow, but it was enough. The air flew from his lungs in a pained gasp. He stumbled, his vision swimming with black spots. He managed to shield the girl with his body as they fell, his shoulder and head cracking against the hard pavement. His ears were ringing. The girl was wailing, her small fists beating against his chest. He tried to push himself up, but his arm wouldn't obey. A wave of nausea washed over him. He had failed. Again. He hadn't even made it 5 steps. He was just another piece of debris on the street, another victim waiting to be crushed. Through the ringing in his ears he heard a new sound. The splintering of wood. Lacquered chain prison! A blur of movement, and then the world was a cage of twisting, growing branches. The metal tendrils were ensnared, held back by the impossibly fast-growing wood. Izuku looked up, his vision clearing just enough to see the familiar form of the pro-hero Kamui Woods, his wooden arms outstretched, holding the chaos at bay. Another hero, a woman in a sleek silver costume he didn't recognize, zipped past, snatching the crying girl from his arms and depositing her safely with her mother before returning to the fray. A moment later, a paramedic was kneeling beside him. "Kid, you okay? Can you hear me?" Izuku could only groan in response. He felt a gentle hand on his head, another checking his ribs. He saw a flash of green as his mother pushed past the paramedic, her face a mess of tears and raw terror. "Izuku! Oh, my baby!" She sobbed, her hands hovering over him, afraid to touch him, afraid he might break. He saw Kamui Woods glance back at them, his wooden mask unreadable. The hero's focus was on the villain, a man in a welding mask standing atop a twisted monument of cars and girders, laughing maniacally. The heroes were doing their jobs. They were fighting the villain, protecting the city. And Izuku? He was on the ground, a casualty, a problem to be dealt with after. The glancing blow from the pipe hadn't just bruised his ribs, it had shattered the last, fragile piece of his heroic delusion. He hadn't just been proven powerless. He had been proven a liability. His foolishness hadn't saved anyone. It had only added one more person for the real heroes to worry about. He closed his eyes, the siren song of his own failure drowning out the actual sirens now filling the air. The second time in 3 days they sat in their apartment in the aftermath of a villain attack. This time, Izuku had a large, angry purple bruise blooming on his side and a bandage taped to his temple. The paramedic had cleared him of any serious injury, but the diagnosis felt wrong. He was fundamentally broken. Inko was the one who was different. The frantic terror was gone, replaced by a terrifying, chilling calm. She had cleaned his scrapes with a steady hand, her movements precise and detached. She made tea, placing a cup in front of him before sitting down with her own. For a long time, she just stared into the swirling green liquid. "My cousin, Hisako, she lives in America," Inko began, her voice low and steady. It was the calm before a storm. Her son, Kenji, when his quirk manifested, it was dangerous, not flashy, like yours, like the ones on TV. He could absorb energy. Any kind. Sound, light, heat. But he couldn't control it. He lived in a constant state of sensory overload. He couldn't go outside. He couldn't be around people. The doctors here didn't know what to do with him. Izuku listened, confused. He had never heard this story before. Hisako was desperate. Inko continued, her gaze still fixed on her tea. She searched for years, looking for help. She found it. A school. A private, very exclusive school in America, in a place called Westchester, New York. She finally looked up, and her eyes were filled with a terrifying resolve that Izuku had never seen before. It's run by a man named Professor Charles Xavier. Hisako said he specializes in unique children. Children whose gifts are misunderstood, or dangerous. A school for the gifted, she called it. A safe haven. She sent Kenji there. And he got better. He learned control. He's happy now. A cold dread began to pool in Izuku's stomach. He knew where this was going. Mom, what are you saying? I'm saying this world, this country, it's too dangerous for you, Izuku. Each word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall around his future. Not because you're quirkless, but because you have the heart of the greatest hero I have ever known. And in a world of monsters and demigods, that heart is going to get you killed. The dam of her composure finally broke. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice didn't waver. I can't watch it happen. Tonight, when I saw you run, when I saw that pipe hit you, I saw your funeral, Izuku. I saw myself burying my only child because he wanted to help. I cannot do that. I will not. No, Izuku whispered, shaking his head. The dread had turned to ice in his veins. No, Mom, you don't understand. Yui is here. The hero schools, my whole life, it's all here. I can't just leave. Yui? She cried, her voice cracking with a mixture of love and agony. Izuku, listen to yourself. You were told by your idol that you can't get in. You have no power, no way to pass the entrance exam. What is that dream now but a beautiful, sun-drenched road leading off a cliff? So you're giving up on me too? The accusation flew from his lips, sharp and cruel. He instantly regretted it, but it was too late. Inko flinched as if he had struck her. Her face crumpled. Giving up on you? She sobbed, her body shaking with the force of her grief. Izuku, this is the only way I can think of to save you. I'm sending you away because I love you too much to watch you die for a dream that is killing you. Don't you see? I would rather have my son, alive and an ocean away, than a memory in a hero-worshipping country that doesn't care about the quirkless boy who tried. She stood up and came around the table, kneeling in front of him, her small hands taking his. They were ice-cold. Please, Izuku, she begged, her forehead resting against their joined hands. Please let me do this. Let me send you somewhere safe. Somewhere they can help you. Maybe they can teach you a different way. A way to be special that doesn't involve fighting monsters. Please, baby. Don't make me watch you die. He looked down at his crying mother, at the woman who had supported him, defended him, and encouraged him his entire life. He saw the genuine, soul-deep terror in her eyes, a terror he had put there. He saw the events of the last few days through her eyes, her son, nearly suffocated by sludge. Her son, his spirit crushed by his idol. Her son, battered and bruised on the pavement after a reckless, futile act of heroism. She wasn't taking his dream away. She was trying to save his life from it, and in that moment, something inside him gave way. The fight, the denial, the grief, it all collapsed under the crushing weight of his love for her. He couldn't do that to her. He couldn't let her live in constant fear, waiting for the phone call that would tell her he'd finally run into a battle he couldn't survive. A single tear dripped from his eye, landing on her hand. Then another. Soon, he was crying with her, not loud, desperate sobs, but the quiet, hopeless tears of surrender. "Okay," he whispered, the word feeling like a betrayal of everything he had ever been. "Okay, Mom. I'll go." The relief that washed over her was so profound it was almost as painful as her fear had been. She hugged him tightly, a mess of apologies and thank yous and promises that it would be okay. Izuku hugged her back, his eyes open and staring at the wall. He felt hollowed out, a fragile shell of the boy he used to be. He was giving up. He was running away. He wasn't going to be a hero. He was going to a special school in America because he was a problem that needed to be solved. A quirkless boy with a hero complex, too weak to succeed, too stubborn to quit. Later that night, he lay in his bed, staring at the scarred walls of his room. The dream wasn't just broken anymore. It was dead and buried. And in a few weeks, he would be leaving the graveyard behind. He picked up his oldest, most detailed notebook, the one labeled Hero Analysis for the Future Number 13. He stared at the title, his vision blurring with fresh tears. With a trembling hand, he crossed out the word hero. He didn't know what to write in its place. He just knew that his future, whatever it held, would not be found here. It was waiting for him across an ocean, in a place he didn't know, on a path he never wanted. It was the start of a different kind of life. A different kind of broken dream. The flight to New York was an exercise in suspended animation. For 14 hours, Izuku was caught in a liminal space, neither in the home he was forced to leave nor at the destination he dreaded. He sat by the window, but he didn't see the patchwork of clouds or the deep, endless blue of the Pacific. He saw the reflection of a pale, hollow-eyed boy who looked like a stranger. A ghost in a fuselage. His mother sat beside him, a silent, tense statue of maternal anxiety. Her hand rarely left his. Every time the plane shuddered with turbulence, her grip would tighten, a physical manifestation of the fear that had propelled them across the world. She would offer him snacks he didn't eat, drinks he didn't want, and platitudes that felt like papering over a canyon. "It will be a great opportunity, Izuku. You'll make so many new friends. It's a new beginning." Izuku would just nod, the motion feeling disconnected from his body. A new beginning implied the old one had ended. He was still attending its wake. His dream hadn't just died, it had been murdered, and he was being exiled from the scene of the crime. Clearing customs at JFK Airport was a blur of foreign sounds and unfamiliar faces. The English he had studied so diligently in school felt clumsy and alien on his tongue. The air smelled different, a mixture of roasted nuts, exhaust fumes, and a dampness that was wholly unlike the humidity of Muzurifu. It was overwhelming, a sensory assault that only heightened his sense of dislocation. A prearranged car service was waiting for them, a quiet man holding a sign that simply read, Midoriya. The drive out of the city and into the suburbs of Westchester County was a journey into another world. The towering steel and glass canyons of New York City gave way to rolling hills and lush, dense forests. The trees were old and enormous, their leaves forming a thick canopy that dappled the road in shifting patterns of light and shadow. Grand, sprawling houses set far back from the road behind stone walls and iron gates hinted at a level of wealth Izuku could scarcely comprehend. It felt less like a suburb and more like the private domain of kings. Inko stared out the window, her expression a mixture of awe and trepidation. "It's so green," she murmured, as if the color itself were a strange and exotic commodity. Izuku remained silent. He noted the architectural styles, Tudor, colonial, Victorian, with the detached interest of an academic. He was cataloging his prison, memorizing the shape of its walls. Finally, the driver turned down a long, winding road named Graymalkin Lane. The name sounded old, like something from a storybook. The car slowed and came to a stop before a set of truly colossal wrought iron gates. They were at least 15 feet high, intricately designed with elegant swirls and flourishes. In the center of each gate was a large, stylized X set within a circle. It looked official, foreboding, and final. Beyond the gates, a long, paved driveway snaked through a meticulously manicured lawn, leading to a mansion that seemed to have been pulled from a dream. It was an enormous, stately building of gray stone and dark timber, with dozens of windows glinting in the afternoon sun. It had the imposing grandeur of a European castle, yet the sprawling wings and multiple chimneys gave it the feel of a sprawling, ancient home that had grown organically over centuries. Is that it? Inko breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. The gate swung open silently, without any visible mechanism, and the car proceeded up the drive. As they drew closer, Izuku could see that it wasn't just a house. There were other buildings visible through the trees, what looked like a modern hangar, a large greenhouse, and what might have been stables or garages. It was a compound. A campus. The car crunched to a halt on the gravel before a massive oak door. The driver, still silent, opened their doors for them. As Izuku stepped out, the sheer scale of the place hit him. He felt like an ant approaching a cathedral. This wasn't a school. This was a fortress. And he was its newest, most insignificant prisoner. Inko smoothed down her dress, looking flustered and small. Well, I suppose we should ring the bell? Before she could take a step, a voice echoed in their minds. It wasn't a sound that traveled through the air to their ears. It was a thought, planted gently and directly in the center of their consciousness. It was a man's voice, calm, warm, and deeply resonant. Welcome, Mrs. Midoriya Izuku. Please don't be alarmed. The front door is open. Come in, Inko gasped, her eyes wide with shock, her hand flying to clutch Izuku's arm. Izuku froze, his analytical mind scrambling to understand. A telepathic quirk? No, the range, to project so clearly from inside the building. It was a display of power so effortless and profound that it dwarfed almost anything he had ever seen. The great oak door swung inward, revealing a grand, sunlit foyer. The floors were polished hardwood, partially covered by a rich burgundy rug. A sweeping staircase dominated the far wall, and the air smelled of old books, lemon polish, and something floral and sweet. It was intimidating, yet undeniably welcoming. A man was waiting for them at the base of the stairs. He was seated in a sleek, high-tech wheelchair, a plaid blanket draped over his legs. He looked to be in his later years, with a bald head, a kind, intelligent face etched with fine lines, and eyes that were a startlingly clear and piercing blue. They seemed to hold a universe of wisdom and empathy. He radiated an aura of profound peace and unshakable authority. This was a man who commanded respect without ever needing to raise his voice. Mrs. Midoriya Izuku, he said, his spoken voice just as warm as the one in their heads. He gestured for them to approach. I am Professor Charles Xavier. It is a genuine pleasure to finally meet you both. I hope your journey was not too taxing. He spoke in perfect, unaccented Japanese. Inko, visibly relieved, bowed deeply. Professor Xavier, thank you so much for seeing us. It is an honor. Izuku, his manners drilled into him from birth, followed suit, bowing low. Thank you for having us, sir. Xavier smiled, a gentle, genuine expression that reached his eyes. Please, there's no need for such formality. You are our guests. And soon, Izuku, I hope you will consider this your home. He addressed Inko. I understand my method of greeting was unorthodox. My apologies. Telepathy can be startling for those unaccustomed to it. It is simply the most efficient way to communicate for me. Your quirk? Inko asked, her curiosity overriding her nervousness. A similar principle, but we use a different term here. Xavier explained patiently. I am a mutant. As is everyone who studies and teaches at this school. My mutation grants me telepathy. It is why Hisako contacted me about her son Kenji. And it is why you are here. His piercing blue eyes settled on Izuku, and for the first time, Izuku felt truly seen. It was a disconcerting feeling. All might have looked at him, but this man seemed to be looking into him. I can sense the shape of your thoughts, Izuku, Xavier said softly, his voice a balm on Izuku's raw nerves. The color of your emotions. I am not reading your mind. I would never invade your privacy in such a way without explicit permission. But your feelings are very strong. A deep well of heroic spirit, muddied by a crushing sense of loss, and beneath it all, a great potential. A gene that is sleeping, waiting for a chance to awaken. Izuku's head snapped up. Potential? But I'm quirkless. The doctors confirmed it. I have the extra joint in my pinky toe. I don't have a quirk. The words came out in a rush, a decade of ingrained medical fact. Xavier's smile didn't falter. The double-jointed toe is a common, though not universal, indicator among the quirkless population in Asia, it's true. But the X gene, the source of mutation, is something else entirely. It is a part of your fundamental biology, separate from the factors that determine quirks. It is rarer, often misunderstood, and sometimes, it remains dormant for years. I have no doubt that you are quirkless, Izuku. But I am equally certain that you are not powerless. You simply haven't woken up yet. A flicker of something, a dangerous, treacherous thing he thought long extinguished, sparked in Izuku's chest. Hope. He tried to stamp it out. This man was just trying to make him feel better. It was a sales pitch for his weird school. But the conviction in Xavier's voice was absolute. As if sensing his internal conflict, Xavier decided a change of scenery was in order. Why don't I give you a brief tour? Some of our students are between classes. He led them from the foyer into a wide, sunlit hallway. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-faced men and women who Izuku assumed were Xavier's ancestors. From an adjoining room, he could hear the faint sounds of a lecture on molecular biology. It sounded like a normal school, if one ignored the telepathic headmaster and the castle-sized building. They passed a set of large double doors leading out to a veranda. On it, a young woman was stunning. Long red hair was coaxing a shy-looking younger boy to levitate a set of chess pieces onto a board. She had a warm, encouraging smile. Jean, the moment! Xavier called out. The redhead, Jean Grey, turned. Her smile brightened as she saw the professor, and then her gaze fell on Izuku and Inko. Izuku felt a wave of warmth wash over him, not from the sun, but from her. It was a feeling of pure, undiluted empathy. She could sense his anxiety, and was projecting wordless reassurance. Professor, she said, her voice gentle. Are these our new arrivals? Indeed, Xavier said. Jean, this is Inko Midoriya, and her son, Izuku. This is Jean Grey, one of our senior students and a teaching assistant. It's very nice to meet you both, Jean said, her Japanese as flawless as the professor's. She gave Izuku a small, kind smile that seemed to understand everything. He felt his cheeks flush and quickly bowed his head. Just then, another young man walked out onto the veranda. He was tall and lean, with an air of intense seriousness about him. He wore a pair of distinctive ruby quartz sunglasses, even though they were in the shade. Scott! Xavier greeted him. Perfect timing. This is Scott Summers, our student body leader. Scott gave them a curt, efficient nod. He didn't smile. His posture was ramrod straight, his entire being radiating discipline and focus. Professor. Ma'am. Midoriya-san. His acknowledgement was polite but distant. He looked at Izuku with an assessing gaze, the look of a commander sizing up a new recruit. Izuku felt himself shrink under the scrutiny. Scott and Jean are two of our finest, Xavier said with fatherly pride. We do what's necessary, Professor, Scott replied, his tone all business. The contrast between the two was staggering. Jean was all warmth and empathy. Scott was cool logic and stern duty. They were two sides of a coin, and Izuku felt utterly alien to both. They continued down the hall, and Xavier gestured towards a massive, glass-walled conservatory. Inside, a woman with striking white hair and dark skin was tending to a collection of exotic-looking plants. She moved with an impossible, regal grace. As she worked, a tiny, personal rain cloud hovered over a pot of orchids, giving them a gentle misting. She looked up as they passed, her violet eyes crinkling in a warm smile. She raised a hand in a silent, elegant wave. Aurora Monroe, Xavier supplied. She has a unique connection to the elements. Unique connection to the elements. Levitation. Energy blasts from his eyes. If the glasses are any indication, Izuku's mind raced, the old analytical habits dying hard. The casual, everyday displays of power were breathtaking. This wasn't like seeing a pro hero on TV, executing a flashy special move for the cameras. This was life. This was breathing. These people lived and breathed power in a way that made even the highest-ranked pros in Japan seem like part-time performers. And he was supposed to fit in here? A quirkless, powerless boy with a sleeping gene that might as well not exist. The flicker of hope from before was snuffed out, replaced by a fresh, overwhelming wave of inadequacy. He was a fraud. A charity case. He had gone from being the quirkless kid, in a world of quirks, to the powerless mutant, in a world of gods. It was the same isolation, just with a more impressive backdrop. Their tour concluded back in the foyer. It was time. Inko turned to Izuku, her eyes swimming with tears. The moment she had been dreading and rushing towards was here. "Well, Izuku," she began, her voice thick with emotion. She pulled him into a fierce hug, burying her face in his shoulder. "Be good. Be safe. Listen to the professor. Study hard. And call me. Call me every day. Twice a day. I'll set an alarm. I love you. I love you so much, my boy. I love you too, Mom." Izuku whispered into her hair, his own throat tight. The finality of the moment was a physical weight, pressing down on him. This was it. He was on his own. She pulled back, wiping her eyes furiously. She gave Professor Xavier another deep, grateful bow. "Please take care of my son. You have my word, Mrs. Midoriya," Xavier said, his voice imbued with a profound sincerity. "He is safe here. He will find his place." Inko gave Izuku one last, watery smile, then turned and walked out the great oak door, not looking back. She knew if she did, she would never be able to leave. Izuku watched her get into the car, watched it drive away down the long, winding path, and watched the great iron gates swing shut behind it, sealing him in. The silence that descended was absolute. "Your room is on the 3rd floor, east wing," Xavier said gently, breaking the stillness. "It's this way. I believe your roommate has already moved in. She's energetic." Izuku followed the professor's wheelchair to a surprisingly modern elevator, and then down another long, carpeted hallway. The doors were all painted a simple, uniform white. Xavier stopped before one marked 312. "Here we are. Settle in. Dinner is at 6 o'clock in the main dining hall. If you need anything, my office is on the ground floor, just past the library." "And Izuku," he added, turning his chair to face him fully. "I know this is difficult. But a change in perspective can be a powerful thing. You are not defined by what you lack. You are defined by what you are, and what you have the potential to become." With a final, reassuring smile, the professor departed down the hall, leaving Izuku alone in front of the closed door. He took a deep breath, the air tasting of stale fear, and pushed it open. The room was large and bright, with 2 beds, 2 desks, and a large window overlooking the sprawling back lawn. One side of the room was neat and utterly bare, his luggage sitting forlornly at the foot of the bed. The other side of the room was a riot of color and controlled chaos. Posters of bands Izuku had never heard of were plastered on the wall. Clothes were strewn over a chair, and in the middle of it all, a girl with short, spiky pink hair and bright yellow sunglasses perched on her head was bouncing on her bed, headphones on, completely oblivious to his entrance. He cleared his throat. Excuse me?" The girl didn't hear him. He tried again, louder. "Excuse me. Midoriya Izuku desu. I am Midoriya Izuku." She finally saw him, pulling her headphones down around her neck. Upbeat pop music blared from them. "Whoa! Hey! You must be the new roomie," she said in rapid-fire, slightly accented English. She hopped off the bed and bounded over, sticking out a hand. Lexi Takahashi. You're from Japan, right? Awesome! I'm half, but I was born here. My Japanese is, like, totally tragic." Izuku, startled by her sheer energy, shook her hand timidly. "Yes. I am Izuku. Izuku. Cool name." She grinned. "So you just get in?" Bummer about the jet lag, it's a killer. The professor said you were coming. We don't get a lot of new students mid-semester. Must be a special case. She looked him up and down with open curiosity. So, Spill. What's your deal? What's your mutation? Come on, show me. As she spoke, she absent-mindedly snapped her fingers, and a shower of harmless, glittering golden sparks erupted from her fingertips, fizzing out before they hit the floor. It was as natural to her as breathing. The question hung in the air, a spotlight Izuku desperately wanted to avoid. What's your mutation? The one question he couldn't answer. He felt his entire body flush with shame. I do not have one, he mumbled, his gaze dropping to the floor. It is dormant. Lexi's high-energy grin faltered for a fraction of a second. Oh. Huh. A latent. Wow, that's rare. Bummer, she said, though her tone was more curious than judgmental. Well, hey, no worries. I'm sure it'll pop up eventually. Probably when a sentinel tries to step on you or something. That's how it usually works. She gestured around the room. Anyway, that's your side. Closets there, desks there, bathrooms through there. If you need anything, just give a shout. I'm gonna go see if Kitty's up for a trip to the mall later. Welcome to the asylum, Izuku. With another blinding grin and a final snap of sparks, she was gone, leaving him alone in the sudden, deafening quiet. He sank down onto his bed, the mattress soft beneath him. He was a special case. A latent. A project. A curiosity. He pulled his backpack onto his lap and took out his notebook, the one with the scarred-out title. For a long moment, he just stared at it. Then, with a sigh that seemed to pull all the remaining hope from his lungs, he opened it to a fresh page. His pen hovered over the paper. The old instincts, the deeply ingrained habits of a lifetime, took over. He couldn't stop being who he was. He began to write. Subject, Professor Charles Xavier. Mutation, telepathy, class, high-tier emitter/mental type. Appears to project thoughts and red surface emotions without strain over considerable distance. Does not require line of sight. Implies a passive, wide-range awareness. Control is absolute. Moral code seems to prevent invasive mental probing. Key takeaway, power is not a weapon, but a tool for communication and understanding. Subject, Jean Grey. Mutation, telekinesis, observed, empathy, inferred. Power level indeterminate, but control over fine motor tasks, chess pieces, is precise. Empathic field is passive, projects a calming influence. Seems to be a core member of the team structure. Subject, Scott Summers. Mutation, unknown, but protective eyewear suggests an optical-based power that is constantly active. Posture and demeanor indicate a military-style training background. Position of leadership seems based on tactical discipline rather than charisma. Subject, Aurora Monroe. Mutation, atmokinesis, weather manipulation. Power demonstrated on a microscale, personal raincloud, implying immense control and a deep, instinctual connection to her ability. Regal bearing suggests confidence and experience. Subject, Lexi Takahashi. Mutation, photokinesis/pyrokinesis minor. Generation of light/spark plasma. Casual, recreational usage implies low energy cost and innate control. He filled the page with his neat, cramped script, his mind finding a strange, hollow comfort in the familiar act of analysis. He was breaking down the world around him into manageable data, the only way he knew how to cope. He looked at the top of the page, at the title he had written hours earlier on the plane, Analysis for the Future. His future. What was his future now? He wasn't training to be a hero. He wasn't training for anything. He was just here. A patient. An observer. With a heavy heart, he finished the title, Analysis for a Future. Student. It was a demotion. A quiet, devastating admission of his new place in the world. He closed the notebook and placed it on his new, empty desk. Outside the window, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, lonely shadows across the perfect, alien lawn of Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. The first week at Xavier's was a masterclass in quiet, soul-crushing isolation. Izuku existed on the periphery of life at the mansion, a ghost haunting its grand, sunlit hallways. He followed a schedule that felt both rigid and pointless. He attended classes, calculus, world literature, American history, where he sat in the back, dutifully taking notes, but rarely speaking. The subjects were familiar, but the context was alien. The teacher might be a blue fur-covered man with the intellect of a supercomputer, or a woman who occasionally phased through her chair by accident. Every mundane moment was underscored by the extraordinary reality of his new environment. He ate his meals in the cavernous dining hall, a magnificent room with a vaulted ceiling and stained glass windows depicting scenes of mutant-human cooperation that felt more like mythology than history. He would find an empty corner of a long table, keeping his head down, his ears filled with the boisterous chatter of dozens of students speaking a language he only partially understood. Lexi, his roommate, would sometimes wave at him from across the room, a quick, energetic gesture before turning back to her circle of friends. She was friendly but distant, her life a whirlwind of social activity that had no entry point for a quiet, morose boy from another country. The other students weren't unkind. They were simply indifferent. They were accustomed to newcomers, to strange powers, to odd personalities. But a boy with no power? That was a novelty, and one that quickly lost its intrigue. He was the latent, the dormant, the quirkless mutant. He was a walking question mark, and after the initial curiosity faded, most simply moved on. He was polite, he was quiet, and he was, for all intents and purposes, invisible. His nights were the worst. He would dutifully call his mother, forcing a cheerful tone into his voice as he described the beautiful grounds and the interesting classes. He told her he was fine, that he was adjusting. Each word was a carefully constructed lie designed to soothe her anxiety, a kindness that felt like swallowing shards of glass. After the calls, he would lie in his bed and listen to the sounds of the mansion, the distant thud of someone testing their strength in the gym, the faint, melodic hum of Jean practicing her telekinesis, the whoosh of another student, Kitty, phasing through their wall as a shortcut. These were the sounds of power, the sounds of belonging. They were a constant, tormenting reminder of everything he was not. His only solace was his notebook. He filled its pages with a frantic, obsessive energy. He documented every scrap of information he could gather. He analyzed the architectural weak points of the mansion. He theorized about the dietary needs of a student with a metallic skeleton. He sketched diagrams of Scott Summers' ruby quartz glasses, speculating on the mechanics of the adjustable aperture and the nature of the force it was designed to contain. His notebook, once a tool for his heroic aspirations, had become his shield. It was a way to impose order on a world that made him feel powerless, a way to engage with it without having to truly be a part of it. It was during the second week that Professor Xavier sought him out. Izuku was in the library, a magnificent, two-story rotunda filled with towering shelves of books, trying to translate an English text on advanced physics, when the professor's wheelchair glided silently to his table. "Good afternoon, Izuku," Xavier said, his voice as warm as ever. Izuku jumped, startled. "Professor! I'm sorry I didn't hear you." "No need to apologize. You were quite absorbed," Xavier noted, his eyes glancing at the open notebook beside Izuku's textbook. It was filled with detailed notes and complex equations. "I see you are applying yourself to your studies." "I'm trying, sir," Izuku mumbled, feeling his cheeks grow warm. He reflexively closed the notebook. Xavier's gaze was gentle but perceptive. "Izuku, I've been observing you. You are diligent, you are respectful, but you are also adrift. You hold yourself apart from the other students. You observe, you analyze, but you do not participate." Izuku's eyes fell to the table. He had no answer. Everything the professor said was true. "This school is more than just classrooms and textbooks," Xavier continued. "A crucial part of our curriculum is learning to understand and control one's abilities. It builds confidence, fosters teamwork, and prepares our students for a world that may not always be kind to them. Even if your own abilities are yet to manifest, I believe there is value in observation. It might help you understand the potential that lies within you." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Some of our senior students have a training session this afternoon, in a special facility we call the Danger Room. I would like you to join me and watch." The name itself sent a shiver down Izuku's spine. The Danger Room. It sounded terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. A part of him, the old, hero-obsessed part he tried so hard to suffocate, flickered with interest. You want me to watch? Izuku asked, his voice barely a whisper. I do, Xavier confirmed. I believe you will find it illuminating. We will be in the observation booth. You will be perfectly safe. An hour later, Izuku stood beside Professor Xavier in a darkened, shielded room that overlooked a vast, empty chamber. The chamber itself was immense, at least the size of a professional gymnasium, and its walls, floor, and ceiling were lined with a grid of metallic gray panels. It was sterile, empty, and humming with a latent power that made the air feel thick and electric. Impressive, isn't it? Xavier said, following Izuku's gaze. The danger room is a marvel of sheer technology, adapted for our purposes. It can generate solid, holographic environments, robotic opponents, and simulate nearly any physical scenario we can conceive of. It allows our students to test their limits in a controlled, albeit challenging, environment. The lights in the chamber below flickered on, illuminating three figures standing in the center. Izuku recognized them instantly. There was Scott Summers, Cyclops, his hands resting on the sides of his visor, his stance a picture of coiled readiness. Beside him stood Jean Grey, her red hair a vibrant splash of color against the gray room. Her eyes were closed, a look of intense concentration on her face. And then there was the third man, shorter and stockier than the others, with a wild mane of dark hair and a perpetually grim expression. He was dressed in a yellow and brown uniform, and he was currently lighting a thick, foul-smelling cigar. Izuku had seen him around the mansion, a gruff, solitary figure who seemed to move with the coiled lethality of a predator. The other students called him Logan. Today's scenario is a level 7, Xavier explained, his voice taking on a clinical tone. Objective: neutralize a swarm of robotic assailants and disable their central command node before it detonates. A test of crowd control, precision targeting, and teamwork under pressure. As he spoke, the gray panels of the room began to shift and reform. The floor buckled and rose, creating a jagged, uneven landscape of metallic mesas and canyons. From hidden compartments in the walls, dozens of sleek, insectoid robots began to scuttle out. They were each the size of a large dog, with multiple legs and a single, glowing red optical sensor. Engage! Scott's voice boomed through the chamber's speakers, sharp and commanding. The effect was instantaneous. A brilliant, ruby-red beam of pure concussive force erupted from Scott's visor, slamming into a cluster of robots and sending them flying like bowling pins. It wasn't a heat beam. Izuku's analytical mind registered that immediately. There was no charring, no melting. It was pure kinetic energy, a focused, relentless punch. The precision was breathtaking. He swept the beam across the field, carving a path through the advancing swarm. Jean's hands rose, her fingers splayed. A pinkish gold aura flared to life around her. A dozen robots were lifted from the ground, their metal legs scrabbling uselessly in the air. With a graceful, sweeping gesture, she slammed them into each other, the sound of crunching metal echoing through the room. She was a master puppeteer, the robots her helpless marionettes. And then there was Logan. He didn't have the ranged power of the other two. He was pure, visceral, close-quarters combat. He met the swarm head-on with a guttural roar. Izuku watched, mesmerized, as three long, metallic claws slid out from between the knuckles of each of his hands. The snake sound was sharp, chilling, and utterly definitive. He moved with a brutal, feral grace, a whirlwind of claws and fury. He wasn't just fighting, he was eviscerating. He tore through the robots' armored carapaces as if they were made of cardboard, his movements economical and savage. He would spin, duck, and lunge, his claws a blur of silver, leaving a trail of sparking, dismembered robotic parts in his wake. Izuku was more than mesmerized. He was transfixed. His hand, acting on pure instinct, flew to the notebook and pen clipped to his belt. He flipped it open, his mind a hurricane of observation and analysis. Cyclops optic blast, pure concussive force, not thermal. Fired from visor, implying the energy is generated from his eyes and the visor is a focusing/control mechanism. No discernible recoil. Rate of fire is continuous as long as the visor is open. Incredible destructive power, but requires clear line of sight. His spatial awareness is elite. He calculates ricochet angles in milliseconds. He sketched a quick diagram of Cyclops banking a shot off 2 walls to hit a robot hiding behind cover. Jean Grey telekinesis, multi-object manipulation with high precision. Appears to have a weight limit, but it's significant. She's not just lifting, she's crushing and tearing. The energy signature is visible, suggesting it requires focus. Her defensive capabilities are as strong as her offensive ones. She forms a shimmering telekinetic shield to block incoming plasma bolts from the robots. Logan adamantium claws healing factor. Claws appear to be part of his skeletal structure. Material is unknown, but its sharpness and durability are off the charts. Fighting style is a blend of berserker rage and highly trained martial arts. He anticipates attacks, doesn't just react. He takes hits that would incapacitate a normal person and keeps moving, implying a rapid healing ability. He is a force of nature. The ultimate close-range fighter. His pen flew across the page, a frantic scramble of notes, diagrams, and tactical hypotheticals. He wasn't just watching a training exercise, he was absorbing it. He analyzed their teamwork, the way Cyclops would use his beams to herd the robots into Jean's telekinetic grasp, the way Logan would exploit the openings they created to get in close and deal devastating damage. They were a perfect, lethal triangle. His mind was so deeply engrossed in his analysis, so consumed by the dance of power below, that he failed to notice the small details. He didn't see the flicker in the lights of the observation booth. He didn't hear the faint, high-pitched whine that started to emanate from the control panel next to Professor Xavier. "That's odd," Xavier murmured, his brow furrowed in concern as he tapped a command into his console. "A minor power fluctuation seems to be affecting the targeting subroutines." Down in the chamber, the last of the drone robots were dispatched. Cyclops, Jean, and Logan stood back-to-back in the center of a field of wreckage. "Command node located," Cyclops reported, pointing to a pulsating sphere that had emerged from the ceiling at the far end of the room. "Jean, give me a clear shot." "On it," she replied, but as she reached out with her mind, a new threat emerged. A heavy-duty laser cannon, one not part of the simulation's parameters, descended from a panel directly above the observation booth. It whirred as it charged, its targeting laser a malevolent red dot that swept across the reinforced window before locking onto the console beside Xavier. "Professor, look out!" Jean's voice was a cry of alarm in their minds. Xavier's eyes widened. "The safety protocols have been bypassed. It's a malfunction." In the chamber below, Cyclops immediately redirected his aim, trying to blast the rogue cannon, but the angle was wrong. Logan snarled and started running, trying to scale the wall to reach it. Jean threw up a telekinetic shield around the booth, but the cannon's first shot was designed to pierce defenses. It fired. A thick, searing beam of energy slammed into Jean's shield. The pink aura buckled violently, cracks spiderwebbing across the telekinetic barrier. Jean cried out, blood trickling from her nose from the sheer strain. Inside the booth, everything seemed to move in slow motion for Izuku. His head was filled with the professor's calm but urgent telepathic commands to the team below, with Jean's psychic scream of effort, with the high-pitched shriek of the overloading cannon. He saw the second shot charging, brighter this time. He saw Jean's shield flickering, on the verge of collapse. He saw the professor, calm and resolute in his chair, but utterly exposed. And he saw a piece of shrapnel from the first blast, a superheated shard of the cannon's outer casing, that had punched through a weak point in the booth's frame. It wasn't large, but it was moving like a bullet, tumbling end over end, straight for his head. There was no time to think. No time for analysis. No time for fear. His body moved. It was the same instinct that had sent him hurtling towards the sludge villain, towards the little girl in the street. But this time, something was different. As his muscles tensed to throw himself to the side, his mind was still a chaotic storm of the data he had just absorbed. Cyclops' spatial awareness. Jean's reaction time. Logan's explosive burst of movement. It wasn't a thought. It was a feeling. A deep, resonant echo in his very cells. The world didn't just slow down, it stuttered. For a microsecond, he saw the trajectory of the shrapnel not as a blur, but as a clear, predictable arc. He didn't just dodge. He moved with a burst of preternatural speed and agility that felt completely alien to his own body. He twisted, his back arching, his feet barely seeming to touch the ground. It was an acrobatic evasion that would have made a circus performer jealous. The shard of hot metal zipped past where his head had been a millisecond before, embedding itself in the wall behind him with a loud thwack. He stumbled, his own momentum too much for him to handle, and fell to the floor in a heap. He was breathing heavily, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. His muscles screamed in protest, and used to such a violent, explosive command. What just happened? The immediate danger was over. Down below, Cyclops had found an angle, and his optic blast had sheared the rogue cannon from its mountings. It fell to the floor with a deafening crash. The danger room's emergency lights began to flash, and the simulation shut down. In the sudden silence of the booth, the only sounds were Izuku's ragged breaths and the soft hum of Xavier's wheelchair. The professor turned from the now neutralized threat and looked down at Izuku, his expression unreadable but intense. Jean and Logan were already at the door to the observation booth, their faces etched with concern. Logan was the first to speak, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "What the hell was that, Chuck?" he grunted, glancing at the smoking hole in the wall. Then his eyes fell on Izuku, sprawled on the floor. He raised an eyebrow. "Kid's got reflexes." Jean rushed to Izuku's side, her empathic senses on high alert. "Izuku, are you all right? You're not hurt?" As her mind gently brushed against his, she felt it. A faint, residual thrum of energy, like the aftershock of a small earthquake. It was a spark, a flicker of something that hadn't been there before. She looked from Izuku to the professor, her eyes wide with unspoken understanding. Izuku pushed himself up, his body trembling. He looked at his hands, then at the spot where he had been standing. It didn't make sense. He wasn't an athlete. He was clumsy. He had never moved like that in his life. It was too fast, too precise. It was impossible. But he had the proof right there in his notebook. He had been dissecting their movements, internalizing their capabilities. He had been observing Logan's explosive agility, and in a moment of life-or-death panic, his body had, for one fleeting instant, copied it. Professor Xavier smiled, a slow, knowing smile that was brighter than any of the danger room's lights. He looked at Izuku, and his voice was filled with a quiet, profound sense of vindication. "No, Logan," he said, his gaze fixed on the wide, confused eyes of the boy from Japan. "It's more than reflexes." The hope Izuku had tried so desperately to kill, to bury under layers of cynicism and despair, was suddenly, violently, resurrected. It wasn't a quirk. It wasn't borrowed power. It was his. It was a tiny, brilliant spark in the oppressive darkness of his own self-doubt. It was a flicker of something impossible, and for the first time since he had set foot in this strange, intimidating mansion, Izuku Midoriya felt the first, tentative stirring of a new beginning. It wasn't a dream he had chosen, but for the first time, it felt real. The incident in the danger room left an indelible mark on Izuku's psyche. It was a single, brilliant flash of lightning in the monotonous gray sky of his existence at the school, and its afterimage was burned into his memory. For days he was haunted by the phantom sensation of it, the impossible burst of speed, the preternatural awareness of the shrapnel's trajectory, the scream of his own untrained muscles as they performed a feat they had no right to perform. It was a miracle. A fluke. A tantalizing mystery that consumed his every waking thought. He tried to replicate it. In the dead of night, when the mansion was quiet and his roommate Lexi was fast asleep, he would sneak out of his room. He'd find an empty classroom or a secluded corner of the vast, moonlit grounds and push his body to its limits. He reread his notes on Logan's movements, on Jean's reaction times, on Cyclops' instinctive grasp of angles. He would try to internalize the data, to feel the echo of their abilities as he had in that one, desperate moment. He would try to dodge a falling leaf with the same impossible grace. He would try to leap over a small hedge with that explosive power. He would fail. Every single time. He would end up sprawled on the damp grass, gasping for breath, his muscles aching with a familiar, mundane burn. His limbs felt clumsy, his reactions sluggish. The magic, whatever it had been, was gone. The spark had been snuffed out, leaving him with nothing but the cold, hard reality of his own physical inadequacy. The frustration was a bitter pill. He had tasted power, a power that was his own, and now it was gone, leaving him hungrier and more desperate than before. It was during one such clandestine, late-night training session that he was discovered. He was in one of the smaller, unused gymnasiums, a place that smelled of dust and old leather. He had propped his notebook open on a bench, the page displaying a frantic, detailed sketch of Logan's fighting stance. He was trying to mimic it, to replicate the low center of gravity, the coiled tension, the promise of lethal violence held in reserve. "What the hell do you think you're doing, kid?" The voice was a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to come from the shadows themselves. Izuku yelped, spinning around so fast he tripped over his own feet and landed hard on the dusty mat. Leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed over his barrel chest, was Logan. The moonlight slanting through the high windows glinted off the dog tags around his neck. He wasn't wearing his uniform, just a plaid flannel shirt with the sleeves ripped off, revealing thick, muscular arms covered in a trail of dark hair. A half-smoked cigar was clamped between his teeth, its tip a glowing orange ember in the darkness. He looked less like a teacher and more like a predator that had just stumbled upon a particularly clumsy field mouse. "I am sorry," Izuku stammered, scrambling to his feet and bowing frantically. "I wasn't supposed to be in here. I'll leave. I'm very sorry for the disturbance." Logan took a long drag from his cigar, exhaling a plume of smoke that swirled in the moonlight. He didn't move from the doorway. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, flicked from the pathetic sight of the bowing boy to the open notebook on the bench. He pushed himself off the doorframe and ambled over, his gait a slow, deliberate prowl. He picked up the notebook. Izuku's blood ran cold. His private thoughts, his obsessive analyses, his secret hopes and failures, all of it was about to be scrutinized by the most intimidating man he had ever met. He braced himself for ridicule, for scorn, for dismissal. Logan grunted, his eyes scanning the page. He saw the detailed sketches, the notes on his own fighting style. Berserker barrage tempered by martial precision, utilizes feints and psychological pressure, exploits opponents' overcommitment, and the frantic arrows and diagrams, connecting it all. He flipped a page, then another. He saw the analyses of Scott, of Jean, of Ororo. The level of detail was unnerving. Obsessive. "This what you do all day?" Logan asked, his voice flat. "Sit in a corner and scribble in your little book like a damn stalker?" Izuku flinched, the word stalker hitting him like a physical blow. "And no! It's analysis. For understanding. I want to understand how your powers work. How you fight. Why?" The question was a sharp, pointed jab. "Because..." Izuku's voice trailed off. "Because he wanted to be a hero. Because he was quirkless. Because he had a dormant power he couldn't access. Because he was desperate. How could he explain the tangled mess of his life to this man? He settled on the most immediate truth. Because of what happened. In the danger room. I moved like you. For a second. I want to do it again, but I can't." Logan closed the notebook and tossed it back on the bench. He took another look at Izuku, the skinny frame, the cheap sweats, the wide, earnest eyes filled with a desperate, self-destructive fire. He saw the bruises on his shins from failed practice leaps, the scrapes on his elbows from falling. He saw a kid pushing himself past his limits for a goal that was, by all logical accounts, impossible. And in that moment, Logan didn't see a clumsy field mouse. He saw something else. He saw a reflection, a distorted echo of a past he rarely allowed himself to remember. He saw the same stubborn, bone-deep determination that had kept him going through the horrors of the Weapon X program, through decades of war and loss. It was the refusal to quit, the sheer, mule-headed stubbornness to get up one more time than you're knocked down. It was a quality he understood better than anyone. He sighed, a long, weary sound, and pinched the bridge of his nose. "You're going about it all wrong, kid." Izuku looked up, confused. "What? This?" Logan said, jabbing a thumb at the notebook. "This is all head knowledge. Theory. You can't learn how to fight from a book. You can't learn how to take a punch by diagramming it. Power ain't just something you think about. It's something you feel. In your gut. In your bones. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over Izuku. That little trick you pulled in the booth? That wasn't your brain copying me. That was your body screaming for survival. Instinct. You wanna tap into that? You gotta stop thinking so damn much. He looked Izuku up and down again, a critical, appraising stare. You're a twig. A stiff breeze would knock you over. Your fancy power, if it ever decides to wake up for good, is useless if your body can't handle the strain. You saw what it did to you. Left you shaken on the floor like a newborn fawn. He paused, taking a final, long drag of his cigar before dropping it to the mat and crushing it under his boot. He seemed to come to a decision, one that clearly annoyed him. All right. Be here tomorrow. Dawn. Don't be late. Izuku stared at him, dumbfounded. Here? What for? What for? Logan growled, a hint of his trademark impatience flaring up. For your education. We're gonna stop you from being a liability. We're gonna teach you how to take a punch, and maybe, just maybe, how to throw one. With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Izuku standing alone in the center of the dusty gymnasium, his heart hammering in his chest for a completely different reason. It wasn't fear. It was a terrifying, exhilarating surge of hope. He had an answer. A path forward. And his guide was to be the most dangerous man in the school. Dawn came too early. The sky was a bruised purple-gray when Izuku slipped out of his room, dressed in the only athletic clothes he owned. He found Logan already in the gym, doing one-armed push-ups with a frightening, metronomic rhythm. He didn't seem to be breaking a sweat. You're late. Logan grunted, without looking up. I am not. It's not dawn yet. Izuku protested, checking his watch. If you ain't early, you're late. Logan shot back, pushing himself to his feet in a single, fluid motion. Rule 1. Now warm up. Run laps till I tell you to stop. The next 2 hours were a blur of agony. Izuku ran until his lungs felt like they were on fire, until his legs were jelly. Then came push-ups, sit-ups, burpees, a brutal, no-frills calisthenics routine that pushed him far beyond his perceived limits. Logan offered no words of encouragement, only terse commands and critical observations. Your form is crap. Stop whining. Pain is just weakness leaving the body. Breathe, kid, or you'll pass out. And I ain't carrying you back to your room. By the time the sun was fully up, Izuku was lying flat on his back, gasping for air, every muscle in his body screaming in protest. He felt like he had been run over by a truck. Logan stood over him, unimpressed. That was the warm-up. Now the real work begins. He led Izuku to a section of the gym with padded mats and hanging heavy bags. Forget your fancy powers. Forget your notebooks. Today, you learn the basics. How to stand. How to move. How to make a fist. For the first time, Logan's instruction became meticulous. He physically adjusted Izuku's stance, forcing his center of gravity lower. He showed him how to keep his guard up, how to move his feet, how to pivot from the hip to put his whole body into a punch. It was a stark contrast to his earlier brutality. This was the disciplined martial artist, the seasoned warrior, sharing the fundamental grammar of combat. A fight ain't a dance, Logan explained, his voice a low growl. It's about survival. It's about creating openings and exploiting them. It's about knowing when to hit, and just as important, knowing when to get hit. This training became their new routine. Every morning, before the rest of the school was awake, Izuku would meet Logan in the gym. The physical conditioning was relentless, designed to break him down and build him back up, stronger and tougher. Logan slowly, methodically, began to pour decades of hard-won combat knowledge into him. He taught him blocks, parries, joint locks, and throws. He taught him about situational awareness, how to read an opponent's body language, how to use the environment to his advantage. Izuku was a surprisingly adept student. His analytical mind, which Logan had initially scorned, became an asset. He absorbed the information like a sponge. He would spend his afternoons writing in his notebook, not just about powers, but about the new things he was learning. He sketched diagrams of chokeholds, wrote notes on weight distribution in a proper punch, analyzed the biomechanics of a leg sweep. He was applying his intellect to the physical world in a way he never had before. But the most important lessons Logan taught him had nothing to do with technique. They were about mindset. "The world ain't a nice place, kid," Logan said one morning, as they took a brief water break. "It ain't black and white like in your hero comic books. There are bad people out there. Monsters. And sometimes, to stop a monster, you gotta be willing to be a monster yourself. You gotta be willing to do what's necessary, not what's popular." This was a philosophy utterly alien to Izuku. His entire worldview had been shaped by All Might, the symbol of peace, a hero who always smiled, who always saved everyone, who represented an unassailable moral good. Logan was the antithesis of that. He was cynical, world-weary, and brutally pragmatic. He spoke of heroism not as a glorious calling, but as a dirty, thankless job that someone had to do. It was a hard lesson, but a necessary one. It began to temper Izuku's naive idealism with a dose of harsh reality. He was starting to understand that being a hero wasn't just about saving people with a smile. It was about surviving, enduring, and making hard choices in impossible situations. Weeks turned into a month. Izuku's body began to change. The soft, undefined lines of his frame hardened into lean muscle. He moved with a new confidence, a coiled readiness that hadn't been there before. He still attended his classes, still ate his meals in a corner of the dining hall, but he was no longer a ghost. There was a purpose in his step, a fire in his eyes. The true test of his progress came unexpectedly. Logan had decided it was time for sparring. Not a real fight, but a controlled drill. "I'm gonna come at you," he said simply. "Your job is to block. That's it. Don't try to hit me. Just try to stay on your feet." He didn't use his claws. He didn't use his full strength. But he moved with a speed and ferocity that was terrifying. His punches were controlled but solid, his movements a blur. For the first few minutes, Izuku was completely overwhelmed. He was knocked down again and again, the impact jarring his bones, his newly learned blocks crumbling under the assault. But each time, he got back up. He remembered Logan's words. "Get up one more time then you're knocked down." He stopped thinking about the complex techniques he had learned. He stopped analyzing. He just reacted. He let his body, now honed by weeks of grueling training, take over. He felt the rhythm in Logan's attack, a pattern he hadn't seen before. He started to anticipate, to move a split second before the punch was thrown. Logan pressed the attack, wanting to see where the boy's breaking point was. He threw a large, heavy practice dummy, the kind used for tackling drills, at Izuku, expecting him to dodge or be flattened. It was a sudden, unexpected projectile, a burst of kinetic energy hurtling through the air. Izuku saw it coming. His mind flashed back to the danger room, to the shard of shrapnel. He saw the arc, the speed, the impact point. But this time, there was no panic. There was only instinct. The raw, survival instinct Logan had been trying to beat into him. He didn't try to dodge. He didn't have time. Instead, he planted his feet, brought his arms up in a cross-guard block, and braced for impact, just as Logan had taught him. Absorb the force, redirect it through your legs into the ground. But as the dummy slammed into his arms, something else happened. The dormant spark within him, the one he had given up on trying to find, didn't just flicker. It ignited. He felt a surge of energy, a warm, vibrant power flowing up from the soles of his feet, coiling in his gut. It wasn't an echo of Logan's power this time. It was his own, his latent mutation, his kinetic echo, reacted to the massive influx of kinetic energy from the dummy's impact. It didn't just brace against it. It absorbed it. The dummy, which should have sent him flying across the room, stopped dead in its tracks, its momentum utterly negated. For a split second, it hovered against his arms, weightless, before thudding to the mat at his feet. Izuku stared at it, his arms tingling with a strange, buzzing energy. A faint, emerald-green aura, like static electricity, crackled around his forearms before fading. Logan, who had been ready to watch the kid get flattened, froze mid-step. He had seen that green energy before, in faint traces after the danger room incident. But this was different. This was clearer, more controlled. He stared at Izuku, whose eyes were wide with a dawning, incredulous realization. I felt it, Izuku breathed, looking at his own hands as if they belonged to someone else. It took the hit. A slow, rare grin spread across Logan's face. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the proud, predatory grin of a master who has just seen his student finally understand a fundamental, brutal truth of the universe. Well, I'll be damned. Logan grunted, a note of genuine surprise in his voice. He walked over and nudged the practice dummy with his foot. Looks like the pup's finally growing some teeth. He clapped a heavy, solid hand on Izuku's shoulder. The gesture was both a commendation and a promise. The work ain't over, kid. It's just getting started. Izuku looked up at his gruff, unlikely mentor, then back at his tingling hands. The path forward was still long and fraught with pain and hardship, but for the first time, he had taken a conscious step on it himself. He hadn't just survived. He had fought back, in his own unique way. The spark was his, and with Logan's brutal guidance, he was finally going to learn how to fan it into a flame. The breakthrough in the gym with Logan was not a floodgate opening, but a lock finally clicking into place. Izuku had found the key, but the door was still immensely heavy, and opening it would require a different kind of strength than the one he'd been building with his fists. The power was real, the kinetic echo, as he had tentatively named it in his notebook, was not a one-time fluke or a desperate fluke of adrenaline. It was a tangible, verifiable part of him, but it was also wild, untamed, and infuriatingly shy, appearing only in moments of extreme physical duress and vanishing just as quickly. His morning sessions with Logan continued, growing in intensity. The focus, however, began to shift. It was no longer just about toughening Izuku up. It was now about deliberately trying to trigger the echo, to coax it out of hiding. Logan would push him, forcing him to block heavier blows, to absorb greater impacts, but the results were inconsistent. A flicker of green light here, a faint tingling sensation there, but nothing as profound as that first, perfect absorption of the practice dummy. It was like trying to catch smoke in his hands. "You're thinking about it too much again," Logan would grumble, wiping sweat from his brow after a particularly frustrating sparring session. "You're waiting for it to happen, trying to force it. It ain't a muscle you can just flex, kid. It's deeper than that. It's instinct. You can't command instinct, you can only trust it." Izuku understood the logic, but it warred with every fiber of his being. His entire life had been about thinking, analyzing, and trying to find a logical, step-by-step solution to the problem of his own powerlessness. To be told that the answer was to stop thinking felt like being told to stop breathing. How could he possibly master something by letting go of control? It was Professor Xavier who provided the missing piece of the puzzle. He had, of course, been monitoring Izuku's progress with a quiet, paternal pride. He'd seen the changes in the boy, the new confidence in his posture, the hardened set of his jaw, the nascent strength in his wiry frame. He had also sensed the deep-seated frustration that was becoming a new obstacle. He summoned Izuku to his office one afternoon, a place Izuku had not been since his first day. The office was a warm, circular room lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. A large mahogany desk sat before a bay window that overlooked the serene waters of the estate's lake. The air smelled of old paper and Earl Grey tea. "Logan tells me your training is progressing, Izuku," Xavier began, his voice a calm anchor in the sea of Izuku's turmoil. "He says you are disciplined, resilient, and possess a spirit he finds commendable, in his own gruff way. But he also tells me you have reached a plateau. You have touched your power, but you cannot grasp it." Izuku's shoulders slumped. "I don't know what I'm doing wrong, Professor. I tried to do what Logan says, to not think, to just react. But it's not working. The more I try, the further away it feels." Xavier steepled his fingers, his expression thoughtful. "Logan's methods are born of a life of instinct and survival. He is teaching you the language of the body, and you are learning it well. But your greatest strength, Izuku, has always been your mind. Your power is not like Logan's, an intrinsic part of his physical being. Yours is an echo. It is a response. To truly control it, you cannot abandon your analytical nature. You must learn to bridge the gap between your mind and your instinct." He paused, his piercing blue eyes meeting Izuku's. "I believe you need a different kind of training to complement Logan's. One focused not on the body, but on the mind. Jean has been developing her telepathic skills with remarkable speed. She has a gentle touch and a unique ability to help others visualize and connect with their own inner energies. I would like you to begin meditation sessions with her. Meditation? The word sounded so passive, so contrary to the brutal, kinetic training he had grown accustomed to. But he trusted the professor implicitly. If Xavier believed this was the way, he would follow it. His first session with Jean took place not in a gym, but in a quiet, sun-drenched solarium filled with lush green plants. The air was warm and humid, and the only sound was the gentle trickle of a small fountain. Jean was sitting cross-legged on a mat, her expression serene. She had asked him to do the same. "The professor explained your ability to me," she said, her voice soft and soothing. "He believes your power is linked to your perception. You absorb and replicate kinetic force that you observe and understand. But right now, that connection is subconscious, triggered only by your fight or flight response. The goal of these sessions is to make that connection conscious." Izuku shifted uncomfortably on the mat. "How? By learning to listen," she replied with a gentle smile. "Not with your ears, but with your entire being. We're going to start by helping you identify the spark, as you called it. We need to isolate that feeling, understand its texture, its color, its temperature, so you can learn to find it on your own, without needing a practice dummy thrown at your head." She closed her eyes. "I'm going to create a small telekinetic field. It won't be strong, just a gentle pressure. I want you to close your eyes, breathe, and focus on the sensation. Don't fight it, just feel it." Izuku closed his eyes, his mind still racing. "This is silly. How is sitting here going to help me get stronger?" But he did as she asked, trying to slow his breathing, to push away the whirlwind of thoughts. A moment later he felt it. It was a subtle, barely there pressure against his skin, like being submerged in still water. "Good." Jean's voice was a calm presence in his mind, a gentle telepathic whisper that was far less jarring than Xavier's powerful presence. "Now I want you to think back to the moment in the gym, the moment the dummy hit your arms. Try to remember the feeling that came just before the impact. The surge of energy. Don't try to recreate it, just remember it." He focused, his brow furrowed in concentration. He sifted through the memory, past the panic and the surprise, searching for that specific sensation. It was difficult, like trying to remember the specific taste of a meal he'd eaten weeks ago. He found flashes, the tingling, the warmth, the feeling of being full. "That's it," Jean encouraged. "Hold on to that feeling. That is the signature of your power, your kinetic echo. It's your own personal energy signature. Now try to feel for it inside you right now. It's there. It's always there. It's just very, very quiet." For an hour they sat in silence, Izuku wrestling with his own mind. He would find a flicker of the feeling, only to have it vanish when he focused on it too hard. It was like trying to look directly at a faint star, which disappears the moment you center it in your vision. The frustration was immense. Day after day, they practiced. Logan's training in the mornings built up his body and his instincts, while Jean's training in the afternoons attempted to build a bridge to his mind. The progress was agonizingly slow. He learned to quiet his thoughts, to find a place of inner calm he had never known before. He learned to feel the subtle energies of the world around him, the warmth of the sun, the vibration of footsteps on the floor. But his own power remained a stubbornly silent wellspring. The breakthrough, when it came, happened not in the quiet solarium, but back in the familiar, cacophonous world of the gym. One afternoon, Jean suggested a change of venue. "Perhaps a purely meditative environment isn't what you need," she had said thoughtfully. "Your power is kinetic. Maybe it needs kinetics to respond. Let's go somewhere with more activity." She led him to the main weightlifting area of the mansion's state-of-the-art gym. It was a place Izuku had always avoided, intimidated by the sheer, raw power on display. Today, however, it was mostly empty, save for one occupant. Pyotr Rasputin, the gentle giant known as Colossus, was there. In his human form, he was a handsome, powerfully built man with a quiet, artistic soul. But when he trained, he transformed. Izuku watched in awe as Pyotr's skin shifted, his flesh and blood transmuting into gleaming, organic steel. He grew in height and mass, becoming a literal titan of metal. Pyotr was working with a massive barbell, loaded with a staggering amount of weight, several hundred kilograms, at least. He wasn't lifting it in the conventional sense. He was performing what looked like clean and jerks, lifting the immense weight from the floor to his shoulders, and then pressing it overhead in a single, explosive movement. Each lift was a symphony of kinetic force. The clang of the weights, the groan of the metal bar, the sheer, explosive output of power from Pyotr's armored form. It filled the room with an energy that was almost palpable. Izuku just stood there, his analytical mind captivated. He watched the way Pyotr's muscles, or the metallic equivalent, contracted. He saw the way the force was transferred from his legs, through his core, and into his arms. He wasn't just watching, he was dissecting the movement, understanding the physics, the biomechanics, the sheer will behind the action. His notebook was in his room, but the analysis was happening just as furiously in his mind. Don't just watch him, Izuku, Jean's voice said softly beside him. Feel him. Feel the energy he's putting out. It's all around us. That's kinetic energy in its purest, most direct form. Izuku closed his eyes. He remembered her lessons. He breathed. He didn't try to find his own quiet spark. Instead, he reached out with his senses, as she had taught him, and focused on the overwhelming energy radiating from Colossus. He felt the percussive shockwave of the weights hitting the floor. He felt the explosive upward thrust of each lift. He wasn't just observing the kinetic output, he was bathing in it, and in that external storm of energy, he finally felt the resonance within himself. His own power, the kinetic echo, wasn't a wellspring to be drawn from. It was a tuning fork. It needed an external vibration to begin its own. As he focused on the sheer power of Colossus's lift, he felt his own internal energy begin to hum in sympathy. It was the same feeling from the gym, the same feeling from the danger room, but it wasn't a sudden, panicked surge. It was a low, steady thrum. He had found it, and this time, because his mind was calm and focused, it didn't flee when he looked at it. I feel it, he whispered, his eyes still closed. It's humming. Good, Jean said, her voice laced with excitement. Now, the final step. The bridge. Logan taught you instinct. I taught you focus. Now you have to put them together. Your analysis is the key, Izuku. You understand what he is doing. You have felt the energy. Now, echo it. She gestured to a smaller barbell nearby, one loaded with only 40 kilograms. A weight that would have been a significant struggle for him just a month ago, but should be manageable now. Don't just lift it, she instructed. Replicate the action. Use your analysis of Pyotr's form. Feel the external energy. And let your own power echo that pattern. Izuku opened his eyes. He felt different. He felt a quiet, thrumming energy coiled in his muscles, waiting for a command. He approached the barbell, his heart pounding not with fear, but with a nervous, electric anticipation. He bent down, placing his hands on the cold, knurled bar. He didn't just grab it. He mimicked Pyotr's stance, the position of his feet, the angle of his back, the grip of his hands. He took a deep breath, and as he did, he focused on the thrumming energy within him. He wasn't trying to force it. He was trying to guide it. He thought of the lift. Not just the mechanics, but the intent. The explosive upward movement. He pulled. For a moment, nothing happened. The weight felt immense, immovable. The old frustration began to creep in. It's not working, don't think. Feel, a voice that sounded remarkably like Logan's grunted in the back of his mind. Trust the connection, Jean's voice whispered. He let go of the frustration. He let go of the doubt. He closed his eyes for a split second and focused on one thing, the pattern. The echo. The upward explosion of force he had just witnessed. He poured the thrumming energy in his limbs into that single, focused action. And then it happened. A surge of power, far greater than his own meager physical strength, flooded his body. A brilliant, emerald green light, no longer faint but vibrant and alive, flared to life, crackling like St. Elmo's fire around his arms and shoulders. The barbell, which had felt impossibly heavy a second before, suddenly felt manageable. With a yell that was part effort and part pure, unadulterated triumph, he lifted. The 40-kilogram barbell rose from the floor. It was not a smooth, clean lift. It was shaky, raw, and uncontrolled, but it was off the ground. He had lifted it a few inches into the air, holding it there for a precious, eternal second, before his control wavered and he dropped it with a loud clang. He stumbled back, panting, his arms shaking violently. He stared at his hands, at the fading green afterglow. He had done it. He had consciously, deliberately, called upon his power. He hadn't just absorbed kinetic energy, he had replicated a kinetic action. He had echoed Colossus's strength. Jean was beaming, her face radiating pride. Across the gym, Pyotr had paused his own training, his metallic jaw slightly ajar in surprise. He gave Izuku a slow, impressed nod. Izuku leaned against the weight rack, a wide, shaky grin spreading across his face. It was the first genuine, truly happy smile he'd had since he'd left Japan. My analysis, he breathed, the pieces of the puzzle snapping together in his mind with dizzying speed. It's the key. It's not just a hobby, it's how I focus my intent. It's the instruction manual. By observing and understanding an action I can provide the pattern for the echo. I can't copy powers, but I can echo the physicality of their use. The implications were staggering. He could echo Colossus's strength. He could echo Logan's speed and resilience. He could echo Cyclops' spatial awareness. Not copy, but echo. He could create a fractional, temporary duplicate of their physical feats by channeling his stored kinetic energy through the lens of his own understanding. His useless fanba hobby wasn't just an asset, it was the entire operating system for his mutation. A new energy surged through him, one that had nothing to do with his power. It was the energy of purpose. He was no longer just a student, a patient, a charity case. He was a researcher, and the subject of his research was his own boundless potential. That evening, he didn't just scribble in his notebook. He began to design. He designed a new training regimen for himself, one that combined Logan's physical conditioning, Jean's mental focus, and his own unique analytical approach. He created charts and schedules. Mornings were for input, observing the other X-Men train, absorbing kinetic data, and filling his notebooks with new analyses. Afternoons were for output, attempting to echo what he had seen in controlled, specific exercises, slowly and methodically increasing his storage capacity and his control. He was no longer just training his body or his mind. He was training the bridge between them, and with every small success, every fleeting glimmer of green, he was forging a new identity, one born not of a borrowed dream, but of his own uncanny, hard-won power.